We are now going to dive into the Word today. Pastor Benjer is going to be preaching over Luke 7, verses 36 through 50. And so that can be that can be found on page 811 in the black Bible in the seat in front of you. If you don't have a Bible, we would love for you to be able to take that home with you. And if you have a Bible but it's in a translation that's hard to read, take that one. We won't miss it. Yeah, we would love for you to take that home with you this week. Here at Flourish and Grace, we do believe that this is the Word of God, and so if you're able, in honor and reverence for that, could you please stand while I read? It says, one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet and her tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. A certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, your sins are forgiven. Then those who were at table with him began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Paige. You guys can have a seat. Good morning, Flourishing Grace. My name is Benjer. I'm the lead pastor here at Flourishing Grace. And I'm excited for this morning, but before we dive in for what God has for us in the Word, which I'm really excited about, I do want to commend the Easter Renewal offering for you. Let me just through a couple of stories. First of all, both of the ministries, organizations that we're supporting, really near and dear to my family's heart for a couple of reasons. One, our family has been a foster family. We've adopted 3 children out of foster care, and Flourishing Grace is the reason why we were able to do that over the last 8 years. Yeah, there you go. That's my table group right there. Excellent. Without people like our table group, and that was my daughter, without people in my table group, and without Flourishing Grace, we just would not have been able to do that. And what Promise 686 is trying to do is to create that kind of scaffolding around foster and adoptive families across churches in Utah. And it's a great ministry. And then another story, Flourishing Grace has been around 8 years. And there's been a church on this corner for longer than that, a lot longer than that, and just a lot of history here. But a little over 8 years ago, when Flourishing Grace was replanted as a church, Josh Knight, who held this position before me, he took me out. He and I had been friends in ministry, and he took me out, and he's like, hey, I want you to come down to Flourishing Grace because we're going to replant this thing, and we're not really sure what God's going to do, but I would love your help. And I said, man, we can't afford 2 pastors. Like, I know your budget. I know that this isn't going to work. And he said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to raise portions of our salary. And honestly, when Flourishing Grace started in January of 2017, we weren't sure if this was going to work. We knew God was in it. We knew God had called us here. But we were not guaranteed an outcome by any stretch of the imagination. We weren't sure we weren't sure if we were going to be able to keep the lights on. And it is really cool to be able to sit here in a full room and celebrate baptisms. But honestly, it was a day that we weren't sure we'd be standing here. And it was the generosity of a church called Church of the Cross in Texas that had their own Easter Renewal Fund. And for 2 or 3 years, we were recipients of that Easter Renewal Fund. And that through that generosity, which God used, is one of the reasons why we are still here today. And so that's what we want to do for Good Soil Church. Many of you know Bailey and John Miney. John has preached here before. You'll see him next week. These are it's just something really cool we get to do, to be be generous because God has been generous with us. Again, 100% of those funds go outside the walls of these churches. We don't even take anything off for credit card processing fees, anything like that. And so we're going to collect that on Easter. It'll actually be open through the end of April, but the idea is between now and Easter, you would talk with your friends, your spouse, your family, and just say, man, what has God given us that we can give to this effort? And so I commend it to you. With that in mind, let me pray, and we will get going. Father, you indeed have been generous with us, and I pray that as even this morning you have given us your own presence. You've been generous with us by being near to us, by drawing near, not because of anything we have done, but because of who you are and what Jesus has done on our behalf. And so, Father, would you speak today through your word? Would it not be my words, but would it simply be you speaking through your word? Would you prepare our hearts and our minds to listen, to digest, and Father, to change what needs to be changed because of who you are and who you've asked us to be. God, you are good, you are generous, and we thank you for that. Would you be near? In Jesus' name, amen. It was my freshman year in college. I went to a small little school in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I went there because my brother and sister had gone to that school, and I really very much wanted to be like them, especially my brother. My father passed away when I was 3 years old, and my brother, who was 9 years older than me, kind of stepped into that role. He was a great brother, and I wanted to be just like him, and he had gone to this school, and I went to school a few weeks early because I played soccer, and so we moved in a little bit early, and it was kind of weird. We didn't have that move-in day, and a little chaotic, and so my brother came down to help out a couple of weeks later, get me set up with some more things for my dorm because he's a great brother. And after all of that, he took me out to lunch, and I remember where we were sitting. It was in the old Chicago in Colorado Springs on Tejon Street, and I remember where I was sitting. The waitress had come, had taken our order. I remember the room we were sitting in. I was facing out towards the street with these big windows, and after she leaves, my brother leans over and says, "So Mom says you've been going to church." But the way he said it was, "So Mom says you've been trying out drugs." This is not an exaggeration. He was concerned for me because he's a good brother. My brother and I, we were both dorks. We're both math majors. Yes, I went to math camp. And thank you for that. Here we go. Again, my own table group right here. The outlook that we had on the world is if we couldn't see it, taste it, touch it, compute it, wrap our minds around it, put it in an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it was, it didn't exist. It wasn't real. And so we were both kind of solidified on that, but something happened towards the end of my high school years. I decided, man, I am not okay. I need something different. My best friend, Matt, was a Christian, but I was too proud to say, "Hey, Matt, tell me about Jesus." And so, Matt went to church, and so maybe I should go to church. So I found a church when I got to college. I had gotten involved in this ministry called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Anybody from InterVarsity in here? Yeah, there we go. I know we got a few of you here. It is a non-denominational Bible study. There's one at the U. There's one at Weber State. It happens all around the world. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful ministry. And that is the point to which my brother brought me and said, "Mom says you've been going to church." And over that first semester, God did a work in my life. And I surrendered my life to Jesus. And I didn't have all my questions answered. Now, I'm a skeptic by nature. If you're a skeptic, you are in good company. You might be here and you might be like, "I'm not sure any of this is real." Listen, that is exactly where I was sitting when I was 19 years old. And so I did my research. My mom gave me this book called Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And it was all about, could this Jesus thing actually be demonstrably, could be true? Could you actually show that this is a likely outcome, that he actually rose again from the dead, that we can trust the Gospels? And I'd get some of those questions answered, but honestly, by the end of the semester, I didn't know much. I was 19, so I thought I knew everything, right? But I didn't know much. But this is what I did know, okay? I knew I was broken. I was sinful. I knew that Jesus had forgiven me. And I knew that my life had changed because of it, and I wanted my life to be different from that point on. And so, friends, today, I don't think it's an accident that we're at this passage that God has us in today. If you're new, you may not know this, or you haven't been around for a while. This is my first sermon as your lead pastor, and it is a joy to be your lead pastor. And what I love about this passage is that this is where God had me when I was 19 years old. And so really, when I think about Flourishing Grace, and I think about this church family, I think about the people in our communities who don't yet know Jesus, the love and the grace and the mercy of God. this is my prayer for you. This is my prayer for our community. That you would know your sin, that you know Jesus has forgiven you, and to live your life in light of that. And today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through this encounter that Jesus has with a lot of people, but really there's two people that are highlighted here. One is a woman and one is a guy named Simon the Pharisee. And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert right off the bat. You see, when you encounter this interaction, everybody watching this interaction in real time would have thought, man, who's the good guy here? Man, it's Simon the Pharisee. He's a religious guy, knows the rules, never misses synagogue. He's a leader. He's respected. Man, he's the guy you should be like. And who's the one you shouldn't be like? Well, it's this woman who's a sinner. Spoiler alert, by the end, Jesus is going to lift up the woman as a model of faith for you and I to say, man, that's what it should look like to follow Jesus. And so that's where we're going to be today. Now, let me set up this setting a little bit. Paige read it for us. We're not going to go through every single little bit, but at the beginning, it's important that we know kind of what's going on. In verse 36, you can open up your Bibles. It'll be up here on the screen. It says, one of the Pharisees asked him, meaning Jesus, to eat with him. Now, right off the bat, Luke is setting something. Now, to you and me, that may not mean much, but for those who would be listening to this, listening to Luke tell this and reading this for the first time, this would have meant some very significant things happening here. First of all, that this is a Pharisee, right? What is a Pharisee? A Pharisee was a religious leader, and their shtick, like their thing, was that they believed that in order to honor God, in order to be accepted by God, you needed to follow all of God's laws to a T. And it wasn't just all 600 plus laws that you found in the Old Testament, what they would have known as the Jewish, as their Bible, as the Hebrew Bible. But if the line was here, if God put the line here, like, okay, don't cross that line. They would say, well, let's be extra sure we stay away from that line, so we're going to put the line over here, and we're not going to cross this line. So if we're not supposed to do work on the Sabbath, we're going to say, man, this is how many steps you're allowed to take on the Sabbath. That's who the Pharisees were. And one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And I'm going to ask for a bottle of water. If somebody can come grab it over there, I'd be really grateful. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now, this was not just like, hey, Final Four is going on, come on over, let's grab some pizzas, we're going to sit in front of the TV, we're going to have a little meal. No, this was an act of intimacy, right? For this to happen, for you to invite somebody into your house for this meal was a sign that, man, I want to be friends with you, and we're going to have this intimate setting. Like, this wasn't just a casual thing. This was, I am going to welcome you into my life. This was a big deal. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner. Now here's the second character. Here's the second one that we see, this woman. Now Luke, I should point out, Luke calls the Pharisee a Pharisee 4 times before he gives us his name, which is Simon. Because Luke is setting up this conflict. Luke does not name the woman, and it's not out of a lack of respect for the woman. As we see, the woman's going to end up being the model of faith, right? This woman is a woman of the city who is a sinner. Now, what does that mean? Luke's not being rude, but he's saying what everybody around her would have been thinking. He's setting this up. And I think the reason why Luke doesn't give her a name, thank you very much, I appreciate you. That's all right. Everybody say thank you to Huxley. It's just that kind of a morning around here. The thing that you need to understand about why Luke doesn't give her a name and doesn't name her profession, right? A woman of the city, this is most likely a euphemism for being a prostitute, right? Is because Luke wants us to view this interaction through the eyes of the woman. He makes her anonymous because he's holding her up as a model of what it means to follow Jesus. And so because of that, it doesn't give her a name. We're supposed to look at this woman and say, this is what it means to follow Jesus. When she learned that he was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wipe them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this was who was touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. Now, here's the conflict, right? Now, around this meal, remember, this is an intimate setting. This would have been an act of intimacy, but it also would have been a public setting, right? It would have been in a courthouse, and Simon the Pharisee's probably a little open courthouse that would have been open to the street. And so people were allowed to come and watch the meal because this was entertainment, right? There's no Netflix. And so all these religious leaders, this crazy rabbi named Jesus is going to be there. This was like the happening thing in the town. And so these people were welcome to not take part in the meal, but stand around the meal and listen to the conversation. And it's into that context that the woman enters the meal. Now, Jesus would have been probably laying down on his left side and eating with his right hand, and his feet would have been sticking out behind him. And this woman, this is not the first time she's encountered Jesus. It's very clear that she has had a previous encounter with Jesus, and that is what is informing what she is doing. And she comes up to him, and she's weeping. She is so moved. She's weeping, and her tears fall on his feet, and so she lets down her hair and wipes his feet with her hair and anoints his feet with the oil. Now, there's a lot of disagreement about just how scandalous this was, that she let down her hair. To us, we're like, well, it's not really a big deal. But here's what you need to know about this culture. When a woman got married, she would put her hair up for the wedding, and she would never let it down again the rest of her life except in the presence of only her husband. It was that intimate of an act. And into this scene, Jesus draws kind of a contradiction between what the woman is doing and what Simon the Pharisee is doing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this through the eyes of what Jesus wants us to see. He wants us to look and compare who Simon the Pharisee is and who the woman is and how they react. And so that's what we're going to do the rest of the time. The first difference is this. They see their sin differently. Now you might be like, Benjer, why are we starting with sin? There's all this mercy and Jesus forgives her and all this beautiful stuff. Why do we have to start with sin? Well, it's where Jesus starts, right? When we look at this scene, we see a big difference between the actions. We see what the woman did, we see what Simon the Pharisee did, but Jesus zeroes in on the core of why they act differently. And the first thing that he goes after is that they see their sin differently. This is the story he tells. He tells this. He says, Simon, I got something to tell you. A certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon answered, and I think begrudgingly, this one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Now remember, it's very clear as Jesus sees what's happening that this is a story about Simon and the woman. And it's easy to look at this and be like, oh, I get it. 500 denarii and 50 denarii, the woman must have been a big sinner. That's not what Jesus is getting at all. In fact, there's a detail in here that I've missed until we started preparing for this, and I don't know if I just ran past it too many times, but Jesus says this. He says, when they could not pay, both the debtors are in the exact same position. Right? Now, a denarius was about what a day laborer would make in a day. Right? That was their pay for the day. If you were a laborer, no matter what you did, it was likely a denarius. And so 50, you might think, 50 is not that big of a debt. It's tough, but it's less than 2 months' wages. You might do the math, what you make, you'd be like, man, that'd be really hard, but I think I could do that. Well, a couple of things. First of all, a denarius, if you were paid a denarius as a laborer, that was barely enough to meet your needs for the day. You didn't have a refrigerator, you didn't have savings, you didn't have any of those things. It wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna put half of this aside, I got my 401k. No, a denarius, if you were lucky, would meet your needs or your family's needs for one day. There was nothing left over. This wasn't like, I'm gonna go without Netflix and we're gonna stop eating out so much, and man, I love my Starbucks, but I'm just gonna get a coffee instead of the latte, and we're gonna figure this out and I'm gonna pay this off. No, it was hopeless. It was hopeless. It didn't matter if it was 50. It didn't matter if it was 500. And Jesus is very, very clear. Neither of them could pay. And here's what they were facing. And here's what the images would have come to mind. They were facing either indentured servitude for the rest of their life, or they would be sent to prison for being unable to pay their debt. And in prison, they would likely die. Because the only way that you could eat in prison was somebody that you knew brought you the food. Right? There wasn't a cafeteria. There wasn't food coming for them. You had to rely on the generosity of others. And after a while, that generosity would dry up. And so, their situation was hopeless. And the difference between the two amounts isn't because one was more of a sinner than the others. It was how they viewed their own sin. You see, the woman saw her sin for what it was. The woman saw her sin for what it was. It was killing her. It had separated her from a holy God. Right? Now, unfortunately, the people that told her that were very likely sitting around that table. Maybe she had been walking down the street, and if a religious leader was walking down the street and saw this woman of the city, they may have crossed over to the other side to avoid her because they didn't deal with those kinds of sinners. Those kinds of sinners were hopeless. Simon didn't see his sin that way. Simon thought, well, nobody's perfect, but look what I do. Look who I am. I'm in service to you, God. Like, yeah, if I fall short in some ways, I can go and I can make that sacrifice at the temple. But Simon did not see his sin that way. No, Simon saw his sin as far less than the woman when both of them were dead in their sins. And because he saw his sin less, he saw the woman's sin more. Unfortunately, this happens in settings like ours way too many times. C.S. Lewis put it this way in his book, God in the Dock, collection of essays. He said, those who do not think about their own sins make up for it by thinking incessantly about the sins of others. They both viewed their own sin differently. Second difference is this. They see Jesus differently. They see Jesus differently. This is how Simon saw Jesus. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, seeing the woman wash his feet with the hair and anoint him, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is there's the word again, sinner. This is how the humans around her viewed her. Simon said, man, if you really were connected to God, you would recoil at this woman rather than lean towards her in love, rather than allow her to have this intimate moment with you, rather than welcome her instead of sending her away. That was how Simon viewed Jesus, and quite frankly, it's how he viewed God. He didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah by any means, maybe a prophet, but after this, no. This is Simon's view of the woman because it's Simon's view of Jesus. Now, the woman, on the other hand, sees Jesus for who he is. She sees her sin for what it is. She sees Jesus for who he is. And can we just note the courage of this woman who walks into this setting knowing that just about everybody around this table who had crossed over to the other side of the street so many times to avoid her, she knew what they would think. She knew the thoughts in their head. She knew what they would say out loud. And the courage that she has to approach Jesus is incredible. Verse 47, this is what Jesus says about her. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. This is her view of Jesus. She knows that she is forgiven. And she loves him, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. Now, we got to be really careful here, right? It's easy to read this and say, okay, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. This isn't like a causal for or because, right? Any grammar nerds in here. This would be like if we went outside after this gathering and we went out there and the pavement's glistening and there's puddles everywhere and everything is wet. We might go out there and be like, oh, it rained because the pavement's wet. No. It didn't rain because the pavement was wet. We know it rained because the pavement is wet. And we know, Jesus knows, because of how she loved, that her sins are forgiven. She sees Jesus for who he is. Now, you may think, okay, Benjer, this is good, and this is fine for you. This is good for you. This is fine for a preacher. This is fine for people who go to church. But you don't know my past. You don't know my sins. You don't know what I've done. You don't know the things that I have thought in the darkness of my heart. And friends, let me share with you. This is too bold, I apologize, but you don't know Jesus if that's what you think Jesus is about. You see, Jesus welcomes this woman. She has the courage to walk in, but he does not drive her away. The Jesus I know is like this. Paul says this in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5. For our sake, he, meaning God, made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him, meaning Jesus, we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus, who was perfect. Jesus, who was holy. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity. Jesus, God in the flesh. Tempted in every way that we have been tempted, yet without sin. He became sin. He climbed on the cross to take on the penalty for your sin and my sin because he loves you. And in turn, he gave us his righteousness so that when God sees us, he doesn't see our acts, he doesn't see what we have done, but he sees what Jesus has done on our behalf. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And in Matthew 11, Jesus says this, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. And by the way, you know who he's talking to? You know what he's referring to? A lot of us are like, yeah, I need some rest. I need some rest. No, what he's talking about, he's talking to people who are weighed down by the religious demands of their day. These impossible rules that you have to do this, this, and this in order to be accepted by God. He says, no, that's not how it is. That's not what God is like. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. My burden is light. This is the Jesus I know. This is the Jesus that invites you, and this is the Jesus that the woman saw. Now, the third difference is this. They respond accordingly to how they see their sin and how they view Jesus. Now, this might be the only thing that they actually get pretty much alike, right? They do very, very different things, but they both act according to how they view their own sin and how they view Jesus, particularly how they view Jesus, right? Here's what Simon does. Jesus, talking about what the woman has done in verse 44, says, then turning towards the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet. But she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Now, Jesus isn't just complaining like, man, this isn't a great place. No, these were expected things, to provide water to wash the feet of the dirty street where all kinds of livestock were washing. That was a normal act of hospitality. It would be normal if you had an honored guest to anoint them. It would be normal to greet them with a kiss. You see, here we see that Simon was holding back. This is how Simon reacted to who he believed Jesus to be. He withheld. He withheld his love because he didn't think he needed a Savior. And certainly if there was one, it wasn't this guy right here. But look at how the woman responds. Like this is huge. This is huge. Look at how the woman responds. There's two things. First of all, in verse 47, it says, therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. How did she love? How did she love? Well, first she brings herself, right? You might be like, Benjer, of course she brought herself. Like she's there. Like there's no Zoom, right? There hasn't been COVID at this time. There's no Zoom. There's no remote work, anything like that. Of course she shows up. That was the only way to talk to Jesus. No, what I mean is she brings her true self. She doesn't bring the cleaned up version of herself. She doesn't say, man, I'm gonna put this prostitution aside, my infidelity aside for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then maybe I'll be good enough to approach Jesus. She doesn't say, man, if I could just do enough and show Jesus that I'm serious, then maybe he'll accept me. No, she brings herself, broken as she was, haunted by the sins of her past, broken by the people who had judged her, by the pain that she carried to get into that profession in the first place. She brings all of it. She brings all of it. She brings herself to Jesus. And friends, that is the invitation to you. There are too many people sitting in this room. And listen, I need you to hear this. If you've checked out, I need you to look up here. There are too many people in this room who believe the only way that you can come to Jesus is to clean yourself up a little bit, and then you can come to Jesus. The only way that you can come to Jesus, you might believe, is that if I go to church enough, or I give enough, or maybe if I'm in enough, or if I put the sin aside for a little bit, if I don't look at that for a while, if I stay away from this for a while, then maybe Jesus will accept me. Friends, that is not the invitation Jesus gives to you. Jesus invites you how you are, not how you think you should be, but how you are today, how you were on your worst day. This is Jesus' invitation to you. He wants you to bring yourself, not some imagined, cleaned up version of yourself. He wants you to bring yourself. And I know there are too many people in this room who don't believe that's what Jesus is like. Friends, let me tell you, that is what he is like. That's who he is. He knows you already. You can't fool him. He knows you. He knew you on your worst day. Jesus invites you. Jesus invites you. And the second thing she does is she brings what's most valuable to her. Remember the alabaster jar of ointment? We're going to go back to that. Behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table at the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. Now, what is this thing? Right? Very likely it's kind of like a clay jar, and it wouldn't have a stopper, it wouldn't have an opening, maybe after a long neck, a very, very small opening so that you could get a whiff of what's inside because it was beautiful. But you didn't open it, because if you opened it, it would evaporate very, very quickly. And so it was an all or nothing thing. And likely, this was something that had been passed down to her for generations. In fact, if she indeed was a prostitute, if indeed she was an outcast, this might be the only possession she has from her family left. It may have been given to her before her parents disowned her, or her family disowned her. This may be the only tie she has to her past, and it is for sure her most precious possession. And she brings it to Jesus, and she breaks it. The only way to open it was to break it, and she pours it out on his feet. Why does she do this? Why does she take this precious thing and just spill it out all in a moment? Friends, here's why. Here's the principle that she had discovered. She discovered something far more valuable than what had been her greatest treasure. She brought her greatest treasure. And she had, remember, this was in her first encounter with Jesus, so she had an encounter with Jesus, and she now had discovered something of greater treasure than what she had previously valued, and that was Jesus. This was no longer her greatest treasure. But she didn't throw it away. She didn't say it's worthless. It hadn't lost any value. It was still worth a lot of money. It still had a lot of emotional attachment to her. It was still a beautiful, beautiful thing. But no longer was it her greatest treasure. Now that she had something that was far greater than that treasure, now that she knew Jesus, it was just simply something for her to bring to the thing that was now her greatest treasure. In an act of worship, in an act of service. She no longer found this thing to be her greatest treasure because she had met somebody who was of far greater worth, who had loved her as she was, who had accepted her as she was, and who had forgiven her. Friends, because of the cultural waters that we live in, it's easy for our minds to say, well, what would that be for us? And because of the cultural waters we live in, it likely has to do with possessions or money. Let me prove it to you. If you opened up your money app right now, or your bank account, or if you're a nerd, if you opened up an Excel spreadsheet with your budget in, or whatever it is, thank you, you would likely have an emotional reaction to what you saw on that screen. It might be, oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. It might be, I made it another month. Or it might be anxious. Oh man, that 401k, man, you need all these tariffs, all these things. I don't know what's going to happen. Might be a negative number. But whatever it is, you likely have an emotional reaction to that number on the screen. What if this thing that you treasured, because you found something of far greater worth, it doesn't become worthless. It just becomes something that you bring to the king. Now don't worry, we're not taking another offering here, okay? It just would be something that you bring to the king in worship and service to him. But it doesn't have to be about possessions or money. Maybe it's about time. Man, this is where this hits me. My time, I love my time. I love things to be ordered. I love things to be structured. We just came back from a road trip to Zion National Park. It was awesome, and I'm the one that drives my kids crazy because I want the schedule. I want us to have enough time in these places, and then we're gonna get to this place at a certain time, so that means we have this much time here. Man, it's an idol sometimes, honestly. But if I view my time, my leisure, the things I get to choose to do with my time, if I value something far greater than that, then my time just becomes something with which to serve and honor Jesus. Maybe it's not time. Maybe it's a relationship or the idea of a relationship. Maybe you thought by now you would have met the one. Maybe you thought by now, man, if I could just find that woman, if I could just find that guy, then I'm going to be okay. Then I would be fulfilled. But if we value Jesus above that, if we find a greater treasure above that thing, then our relationships just become another thing by which to serve and love Jesus. These things aren't necessarily bad. They might be. You might have something in your life that's very clear. You know right now, you're like, oh yeah, if I'm going to follow Jesus, that's got to go. But many of these things aren't bad things in themselves. This was a beautiful alabaster flask of ointment. It was gorgeous. It was incredible. It was valuable. And it was used in service to the king. Maybe it's a career path. Career paths are not bad things. But instead of this career path that's going to make you enough so that you can finally feel content, so that you can finally feel safe, and if I could do this and get the right degree, and if I can do all these things, then I'm going to be okay. What if it moves from that to, how do I bring this career path? How do I offer it in service to Jesus? Because he is my greatest treasure. Friends, this is what the woman does. She realizes that because Jesus is her greatest treasure, everything else is simply to be used in worship and service to the King. So what do we do with all this? I remember my prayer was that you would know your sin, that you would know that Jesus has forgiven you, that you live your life in light of that. And you might be here, and honestly, there's some people in here that you may not know your sin. You may not know your sin. You may think like you're Simon the Pharisee. You may say, I'm fine. I'm fine. At least I'm not that person. Friends, if you see the problems of the world existing only in other people, you got a problem like Simon the Pharisee. Let me just tell you that right now. But friends, even if you don't buy into any of this stuff, even if you don't believe in God, all of us have a standard for living that we don't always live up to. All of us have oughts. That person ought to do that. That person ought to do that. And when we are harmed, we say that is wrong. And we don't always live up to that. Friends, all of us have had those 3 o'clock in the morning moments when we are laying awake and we can't go back to sleep, and we begin to realize and we begin to wonder, man, maybe this isn't how I'm supposed to be living my life. Maybe there is a God. Maybe I am in the wrong. Or maybe you know your sin. Maybe, unfortunately, people like me who have stood on a stage like this have told you too much about your sin. Maybe it was told to you about your parents. Or maybe you just know that you've done something in your life and you say, I can't go to God because of this. Friends, let me tell you this. Jesus is ready to receive you. This is not the sort of thing where only certain kind of sinners get to come to Jesus and be forgiven. No, when Jesus died on the cross for your sin, he paid for all of it. It does not matter how gross it is. It does not matter how dark it is. It does not matter that you haven't even told the closest person in your life about it. Jesus paid for it. And he invites you to come to him, to receive that gift of forgiveness. Not because you've done anything, but because he loves you. He loves you. And just one of the heartbreaks of being a pastor is when sometimes I see people who believe that because of what they have done, that this offer of forgiveness is not open to them, and so they wait, and they say, okay, I'm gonna try to be a little bit better, I'm gonna try a little harder, be a little bit better, I'm gonna clean myself up, I'm gonna go to church, and then maybe I'll be okay with Jesus, I'm gonna do these things, and then maybe Jesus will accept me. Friends, that is just not true. He accepts you just as you are, not because you're anything, but because he is everything. And in him, you have value. We're going to sing a song in a couple of minutes. It's one of my favorite hymns. It's a new version, updated version of one of my favorite hymns by a guy named Joseph Hart. And one of the verses in that hymn says this: "Come ye weary, heavy laden, bruised and mangled by the fall. If you tarry, if you wait, till you're better, you may never come at all." Maybe, friends, you believe both of those things. You understand your sin. You understand what Jesus has done for you. But if you're honest and you look at your life, you're not living that out. And my invitation to you is to consider what Jesus has done in your life and to consider how to make him your greatest treasure, because he is worth it. He is worth it. He is worth it. Now, friends, over the last couple of weeks, a lot of people have asked me many questions. What are we doing next? Benjer, what's your plan? Where are we going? Okay, you got the new job. That's great. Where are we headed? And all those are really, really good things. If you walk around our staff offices, you will see whiteboards full of plans. Like there's just a ton. Like we got to focus in. Like this is really fun stuff. This is really, really good stuff. But that is not what it is about. Friends, my prayer for you, my prayer for this community, my prayer for those who are outside these walls who don't yet know Jesus, is that we would know our sin. Not that we'd be shamed by it, but we would just understand that we are dead without Jesus. That we would understand that Jesus has forgiven us. That you'd understand that. That you'd live your life in light of that. And friends, as a community, would we do that? Would we be the kind of people that when people come and experience what happens in this family, whether it's in our homes, whether it's here on Sundays, whether it's on Wednesday nights, that they would experience the Jesus that we read about here? Friends, people who were nothing like Jesus loved coming to him. And the people who would be least likely to go to any kind of religious setting flocked to Jesus because they knew that there was something different about him. They understood that in him there was life and there was forgiveness. And if we're honest, sometimes it doesn't always happen with his followers. Friends, this should be the kind of place, our lives should be the kind of place, our homes should be the kind of place, midweek should be the kind of place where people who are nothing like Jesus should come because they're interested, because they see a little bit of him in us. That's what it means to live light in light of this. In a moment, we're going to sing this song, and I'm going to invite our prayer team up. Wherever this has hit you today, friends, whether you've realized, okay, I have not seen my sin for what it is, or maybe you have believed that because you've done this in your life or because of this sin that you can't come to Jesus, or you got to clean yourself up. Or maybe you just realize that you've never brought that alabaster flask of ointment to Jesus. That you've never said, Jesus, you are worthy of all other treasures in my life. These friends up here, they have been there too, and they would love to pray with you. And so we're going to have a time of singing, and I'd invite you to stand up and come forward and receive prayer from these folks, whatever it is. You will not shock them, you will not surprise them, but do me this favor. Don't just stand where you are. If you feel the Spirit prompting you, don't just stand where you are. Come forward and respond to what Jesus is doing in your life. Let me pray for you. Father, I confess that there are times where I see my sin as far less than it is, which cheapens what Jesus has done for me on the cross. Father, I confess that there are times when I believe the lie that if I could just do enough, then Jesus would have to love me. And that cheapens his mercy because he's already given it to me. And Father, I confess there are times where I hold on to my greatest treasures. And that cheapens your worth because you are worth everything. And so, Father, I pray that you would help us to see Jesus for who he is, that we would respond in light of what he has done for us, and that we would know the grace and mercy that he offers us for free. Friends, help us God, help us to come to Jesus. Would you be present in this moment? In his name we pray.